On this episode of the Houndsman XP podcast, Steve and I sit down with Mr. Lee Currens. And Steve, you and Lee have had a relationship for several years, been friends for a long time, have not only been to events together, but you've shared parts of your life together with some common friends. And you were talking during, it was after the recording was off, but it was still important. And we were talking about the relationships that people build along the way and how important that is for our lifestyle and the hound hunting community. And I kind of wanted to try to recapture some of that.
Yeah, Chris, for sure. You know, that gets down to the bone, so to speak, with me about this houndsman lifestyle is the friends that I've made over the years. And certainly Lee Currens is one of those that's really special. And of course, I've done podcasts with Nubbin Moore, who's also a very close friend. And there's several guys like that I've been fortunate to get to spend time with. And maybe it's because of our ages or whatever, but we've just had a bond, you know, and that is really the heart of this whole thing for me, because the times that are shared with these people, it supersedes the hounds, really. The hounds are the center of how we got together. And we always do talk dogs when we are together. Mm-hmm. But it's just that camaraderie, that kinship, and it becomes almost like family, really. Some of the guys, and we're going to get into some of that with Lee today and talk about the relationships with some of our mutual friends and the fun times we've had. So I think, you know, I would just hope that the younger listeners to Houndsman XP would kind of get this, you know, and try to reach out to their friends and make, you know, these kinds of bonds, because they are the lasting things.
We get a lot of mail, email, text messages, messenger. We get a lot of correspondence from people about, you know, how do you do this with a hound? Or could you have somebody could tell me how to do this with the hound? And that's all good stuff. But I think as you get older, you touched on it, but you start reflecting on the things that are most important about this. And I would say that the most important thing you can do for your hound is make relationships, build relationships with people that you can go out and share experiences with. And that is what this whole podcast really is about. We talked about hounds, and there's some very historical, noteworthy hounds that are mentioned in this podcast. But the thing that touched me the most was the parts about mentoring and building relationships and the stories that went around that, family-based. I mean, it was an awesome conversation.
Well, I think so too, Chris, and I'm sure that our listeners are going to enjoy Lee. He's got a warm personality. He's a funny guy. He's a smart guy, was an engineer in his career, and just so many things to say about him, just the many facets of a houndsman's life that we covered. It was a great interview.
It really was. I really enjoyed it. And before we get that interview, though, I want to talk real quickly about our Patreon page. There's one thing that's on fire around here at Houndsman XP, and that's that Patreon account. People are piling in on that thing, and we're building our Patreon patrons. We're building an audience there. We want to say thank you to every person who has agreed to come on and sponsor Houndsman XP podcast. And what we're trying to do here, it's bring you interviews like this. It's bring you interviews about Sportsman's Alliance, entertainment, education, and we want to make sure that we just want to say thank you to all our patrons out there that are supporting us.
For sure, Chris, for sure. It's so important, so gratifying to see people that will step up and say, you know, we appreciate, we don't, you know, we can't break the bank here, but we can join at a level that's comfortable to us, and you know, and just let Houndsman XP know that we appreciate what you're doing. And, that's very gratifying.
Yep, it sure is. And to let everybody know, we're touching on this on social media, and we're trying to promote it and let you know exactly what we're doing with that. But we want to be able to bring you the highest quality interviews we can. We want to be able to go to our guests or bring them to us. We want to be able to capture those interviews with the highest quality sound. But we also want to, another big thing that we haven't talked about a lot is we're going to continue to support organizations like Freedom Hunters. And that is a very gratifying thing that we do. And you can find everything you know about Freedom Hunters by going to our website at houndsmanxp.com, clicking on partnerships, and you'll get a whole thing about Freedom Hunters and a link to their website, and you can find out how you can become involved by sponsoring a veterans hunt. Jared Moss has done that. Limberlost Coon Hunters here in Indiana has hosted a veterans event, and of course we took a Gold Star family member on a mountain lion hunting adventure, and we're going to continue to do those things and support organizations like Freedom Hunters. But I just talked to Anthony recently, and the whole pandemic thing is affecting everybody, and he's no different. So if you've got the ability, go to Freedom Hunters.
That's right, Chris. Nothing more gratifying than to see the work that's being accomplished by Freedom Hunters, and from anybody that served in the military, had a family member that served, a good friend, whatever, that appreciates the sacrifices that our veterans and our active duty military and so forth make for us and for our country, will certainly want to become a part of the Freedom Hunters effort. It's truly amazing what those guys are doing.
Yep. Super easy. I mean, all you got to do, so simple. And if you have any questions, we won't get into all of it. I can lay out the plan right here, but send us a message or go to our website, houndsmanxp.com. Look for partnerships page, and Freedom Hunters is right there, and you can get in direct contact with them.
Well said.
Well, Steve, we've talked plenty about what's going to happen, so let's get this interview up and show them what's going to happen.
It sounds good. It's a wild ride. I hope you folks enjoy it.
Yeah, it goes a lot of different directions, but it's fun. All right, here it is. Welcome to the Houndsman XP podcast, and we've got a great show for you lined up this week. We've got a legend in the coon hunting game, and somebody that's worked hard for a number of years. And Steve, you got our guest lined up for us today, and I'm pretty much just going to sit back and try to referee this. I don't know if it's ringleader, conductor of the train, or like referee at a youth basketball game. I'm not sure what we're getting into here.
Sound like a little league basketball.
Let's hope it's better. Let's hope it's better than referees at a little league basketball game.
The voice you just heard is Mr. Lee Currens. And Steve, I'm going to sit back and let you introduce Mr. Currens, and you've got a long-standing relationship with him, and it's all yours, buddy.
Hey, well, this is especially exciting for me today to have my buddy Lee Currens on our program. Lee and I joke about our age and all, but we do go back a long time. And but we have a lot of memories and a lot of fun times. And Lee's a guy that we all have a special circle of friends. I think we have a broad circle of people that we know across the country, and we're always glad to see them. And that's particularly true in this hound game, as you travel around and you always meet new people, and they become friends. But the old friends, as they say, are the best ones. And Lee and I have been friends for many years. Lee, how long have we known each other? Do you have any idea?
In the mid-'80s, 85, 86.
Yeah.
I got back full-time, I guess, into showing and hunting the dogs. I mean, I've hunted them all my life, but the competition part took a slowdown when the family was, busy with Little League and outside things. But mid-'80s.
Yeah, that would have been in my UKC days, and I probably met you at one of the major events. I would imagine maybe Grand American or Autumn Oaks or one of those, because you've always been right there in the thick of things in those big events, and that's kind of why I wanted to have you on today, Lee. There's just so many things that we could talk about, and eventually we're going to get around to talking about our mutual friends and the times that we've had getting together with them and all. But I wanted to set this up just a little bit for our listeners. Lee has been a major player on the in latter years in the bench show arenas of all the major shows around the country, the coonhound shows with his treeing walkers. But there's a side of Lee that a lot of people don't know, and this is something that I know we'll drill down into today, is the hunting side of things and how that's really the core of who our guest is today. But Lee, I want you to tell us a little bit about your beginnings back there in Harrodsburg, Kentucky, on the family farm, and your brothers and your sports activities. Just lay all that out for us a little bit.
Well, see, like you say, I went to a small school. It was all 8 grades, 12 grades actually, at the same school, which no one has today. And I played sports. We had a basketball team, and we had a fast pitch softball. A lot of the schools back then didn't have baseball. Only a few of the bigger schools, and I participated in each. I always thought I was pretty good, and I don't think a lot of people did. But and then I was raised up on a farm. We had farm dogs like most everybody did in those days, and I, 7 or 8 years old, I would be gone at night or daytime whenever I had a chance. I was in the woods. I did not sit at the house. I was either out shooting basketball, or my parents knew I was gone, and it hasn't changed. I still have the same desire to go at my age. I've been told I shouldn't be in the woods, and so I don't go, but that's basically the way I started. I told you that before, my dad had a dairy, and he had registered Jersey cattle, and they were actually registered. We tattooed their ears to match their restoration number, and I got into the 4-H and FFA at a young age, showing these cattle, and believe it or not, the preparing to show a cow the same as preparing to show a dog. Really, we kept them in the barn at daytime, the ones we were showing. We didn't want their color all bleached out and everything. And nighttime they were out in the pasture, but daytime the cattle, the ones that I was showing, stayed in the barn. And we gave them a bath before the show, took the hose and washed them down. And it was and then it just broke over as I got off the farm to my dogs, showing them. And I guess I just had that will to compete. And my dad wanted all registered cows, and he kept the bloodlines up, and it just came on over to the dogs first. And when you get married and have a house and lot, you don't have many cows to show.
Well, let's go back to the basketball just a little bit. And I know you're being really modest about that, but talk to me about your playing basketball. And I know you're an I would say avid, but it's probably more of a rabid Kentucky fan, right. Wildcat fan. And but talk. That's a side that interests me about how you played sports back in those days. Let's talk about that a little bit.
I was in the 6th grade, like I said, of the 12th grade school. Now, actually, my junior and senior year, they built a new school, and we consolidated a bunch of these smaller schools. And I was in the 6th grade, and we had phys ed and in the gym, and one of the coaches wanted me to play on the 7th, 8th grade team. They called it the grade team. They were 7th and 8th graders. So I actually started in the 6th grade, and Steve, I played through the whatever group I was in, be the elementary school or the next level up, which they call back then the B team, A team. I never participated in a game I didn't start. So as a 6th grader, I was starting on a 7th, 8th grade team, and we'd have elementary schools would have tournaments, all the county schools, and then my freshman year, I was scared to death I wasn't going to make the varsity. I was going to still be on the B team, so to speak. But the day of the game, coach told me that you'll be starting tonight, and that's kind of like winning the Autumn's Oak, when someone that young
when you're a freshman starting on the
when
varsity.
you're a freshman in school, yes. And there was some controversy, but the parents of the older kids saying, hey, you got this kid out there playing, and my son been playing 2 or 3 years. Well, that's just like everything else. You play to win, and I know that one game, 2 or 3 games into the season, I put the 3rd game actually. All this bickering was going on, and I didn't know it, but I could hear it on the sidelines and things. So the coach turned me loose, and I scored 23 points in the first quarter. I was 9 for 9 from the field and 5 foul shots. I never missed a shot. We were up 27 to, I think it was 9. And I started the second quarter, scored 4 points. He took me out the rest of the half. Couldn't let me play. Said, I guess that made a statement,
Pressure.
And we never had another issue with who's starting, or whatever.
That
and then,
settled that.
Yeah, and then my sophomore year, which then I was, my freshman year, I was, somebody to fill in, I knew. But we were playing the team in Garrett, in Garrett County, and I scored 35 points in the first half. And
now you were like a point guard, right, or a shooting guard?
We didn't have point guards back
right.
then. We had 2 guards and 2 forwards and a center. That the thing has revolved just like coon hunting has from those days to now. All sports has. We got Michael Jordan just did the reruns on him here, and every time he took off, he walked. Back then, you had to dribble the ball. You couldn't run down the floor and flip it behind your back, and it just the way things has changed, And I wasn't big, and I wasn't fast, and I could shoot, and to tie basketball into coon hunting. Don't tell me how good your dog is. How many coons can you tree? That's the way we based it.
We had an old saying, don't tell me about the labor, just show me the baby, right?
Yeah. If you can't shoot, to this day, I believe this, you can't play ball.
Yeah.
I hear these announcers now. I heard one watching a replay, and here in Kentucky was playing Arkansas, and a couple of Arkansas players in foul trouble, and what did the intelligent announcer say? Well, where's the scoring going to come from now for Arkansas? Well, hell, you got 5 out there. None of them can shoot. They shouldn't have been there anyway. And tell me, am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong, buddy. That's for sure. Well, what about then? So you went through school, I guess, played ball all the way. Did you consider playing ball in college?
No, I did. Yes, I did. And I was recruited and everything, but it wasn't like it is now. I didn't want to. I didn't want to go to school. Actually, I didn't finish college till I was in my 30, I think 34 when I finished up. And this all happened. I was working. Actually, I worked 10 years at Square D. Then I went as a supervisor to Bendix Corporation. I know you've heard of them. Autolite, Fram.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Bendix is the largest manufacturer of engines in the world, were then. I don't know where they are now. And the plant manager came down, sat on my desk. At that time, I moved up to a general supervisor. He came down and he sat on my desk and said, "You going back to school?" I said, "I'm not going to school. I got 3 kids. You know, well, man, you crazy?" And so they picked up the tuition, and I come to work at 8 o'clock. Would go to school and have classes and come back and close out my shift at work. And 3 years I had, you know, I finished up, and it don't matter how smart you are, but if you got a piece of paper, you can always fool people. if you know where I'm coming from, and I got the piece of paper, and it led me a few years later. Michelin Tire Company was in Lexington recruiting, and I got a phone call. Would I be interested in coming to work? I didn't know Michelin made tires in the U.S. So I said, "Well, sure, I'll listen," and I did. And in 1980, we moved to South Carolina. Actually, the anniversary is coming up in a few days here. The day after Memorial Day, I started, and there I can't get into a lot of things at Michelin because I've signed a lot of paperwork, you know, for privacy and stuff like that. But they made molds in France for all the tires, and they were starting up a department to build the molds here, and I went into that with you know, feeds and speeds and all the technical stuff of machining to manufacture the molds, and took us about 7 years to get through that, to get the molds up and going. And then I went into corporate engineering. Well, I was working for the corporate then, but I never worked in the plants. I went to the plants, you know.
So how long were you with Michelin then? Yeah.
21 years.
I see. And you retired. And of course, that entailed a move to South Carolina. But
Correct.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Right. Well, okay. Tell us real briefly about your family, you and Shirley, and your boys. You have 4 boys, right?
I have 4 boys. I told you once about this, but I met Shirley in 1958. It was Easter Sunday, and some of my friends I went to school with and played ball with, we were hanging out in Harrodsburg. She lived in Lebanon, and hey, we met these girls down, you know, the old story. It's Friday night at someplace down there. Let's go to Lebanon. I go to Lebanon, and she was driving her aunt's car. Her aunt and uncle raised her, and it was a 55 Chevrolet. It was that pink. I called it in gray. And we talked, and let's go to the movies. Well, I said 4 hours watching the 10 Commandments with a girl I just met that I thought was gorgeous, and I'm in a damn theater watching the 10 Commandments 4 hours.
Well, that's a way to start off a relationship right there. You might as well lay down the law right from the beginning.
This past Easter, we sat on her on one couch, me on the other, and watched Ben-Hur for 4 hours.
I think she had something for Charlton Heston.
So nothing changed.
Nothing changed.
But anyway,
awesome.
we were blessed. Sometimes I say blessed with 4 sons, Lenny, and then Lee Jr., which everybody knows as Penny. He was known as Penny all the way through school, still is, and Kevin and Todd. And Penny now is handicapped. Steve had a massive stroke. He'd be 2 years this summer. Lenny works for Gregory Electric, and so does Kevin. They're both electricians. And then Todd has Currens, and he had to retire from the I think about 19 years at the sheriff's office. He worked as a deputy sheriff here in Greenville County.
So you have, how many grandchildren do you and Shirley have?
I got 6.
I see. Okay.
I got 2 that's not married, and 3. Well, no, I got 3 that's not married. I better not forget JT. And 3 that are married, and we have 5 great grandchildren.
Well, that's awesome. Well, you and Shirley also. I'm sorry.
Well, we'll be married 62 years in November.
Yeah. She's a saint, Chris, I tell you. Well, she'd have to be, right? Put up with 4 boys plus the biggest kid of all.
Yeah. Now, and we have a relationship that's sort of different, I guess. She knew I hunted. I always told her, look, if you got something you want to do this weekend or any night, you let me know. If not, I might be going hunting. and I never turned her down. If she said, I want to go to wherever this coming weekend, we went.
Yeah, but, that's a formula for success right there, Leah, that a lot of guys, I think, forget. You know, they get so wrapped up in this hunting thing that the whole world, revolves around hunting, and we forget that those people that really mean more to us than anything else in the world have to take second fiddle to play second fiddle to that. Well, there was a really funny story that about while we're on your family there real quick, and then I want to move into these hunting and these hounds and so forth. But the story about your son Penny and his friend or whatever catching the coons and drying the hides and that.
Yeah, buddy. I'm glad she's not in this room and hear me talk about it again, or she'd start all over. Yes, that. Yeah, and that was an experience those 2 kids will never forget. And the young man, Kenneth, that was with him was a single mom, and he became a friend of Penny's forever. He wasn't exactly the most popular kid in the country, because of finances and things, but Penny loved him, and he took care of him, and wherever Penny went, hunting or whatever, Kenneth was with him, and I admired Penny for that forever. Probably the only friend the young man had was Penny.
Well, sometimes we can find friends like that. I had one myself in high school and in my early college days. Name's Chuck, and Chuck had some learning issues, and he was a real big kid, so his size made him stand out, kind of, and he didn't have many friends, but man, did he love to coon hunt. And he and I would hunt together a lot. And so, but tell us that story about those coon hunts. I want you to share that.
Well, Penny was coming 16 years old and 15, and Kenneth lived on the same road we lived on. We lived in the country, and I told him, I said, boys, the fur then, it was somewhere around 74, 5, 76. I'm not very good with dates, but I could add it up in a hurry. It doesn't matter. And I said, you guys can have the fur. We'll hunt. You can do whatever. But you're not going to take but one coon out of a tree. You're not just going out and slaying coons. And so they had accumulated a pretty good pile of coons. And I'd let them go by themselves. They'd ride their bikes down to the river, and then I'd go pick them up in a couple of hours if I had something to do. But anyway, they had probably 40, maybe more coon hides. And we'd put them, we roll them up in a bread bag and put them in the freezer. Well, it was the 27th of December, but we had to shut down at the plant, but I usually had to work. And I called Penny. I said, you get those coon hides, it was 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, and thaw them out. And, you couldn't sell them froze. They had to be thawed. Well, they get them out, and they had coon hides scattered all over the house. They even put some in the microwave to defrost them. it was at least 90 degrees in that house, and can you imagine the smell? And I come home about 30 minutes before Shirley got off from work, got home, and I'd already called her and told her we had to go to Rushville, Indiana to sell them. There was no dealers in Kentucky. And my God, when I got home, I said, boys, you better get all the doors open and get those dang coonhounds out of this house. And they were everywhere. They had 11 fox hides that they had gotten. They had 5 muskrats and whatever coon hides it was. And we threw them in the truck, and I had a Ford truck, and we put some of them in the floorboard under the heater to get them thawed out, the ones that were having trouble getting thawed out going up there. But it was not a pleasant place around our house when Mama got there.
Oh, yeah. Well,
it would be a special.
I got to throw in a story real quick.
It would be
that's
sure.
similar to that. Just to give you, I think every boy goes through that, because we had my grandparents lived in Ohio, and there was a fur buyer and a trapping supply store over there close to where they lived in Lebanon, Ohio. And I'd been in my fur fishing game, and I'd looked through all these ads, and I found this trapping supply company right there close to Grandma's, so I could get my supplies, and we could do it in a trip when we were going over there for a holiday meal, and it was about a 2.5-hour ride over there and back, and so I got the idea, and we're riding in a 1986 wood-sided Caprice station wagon, country classic station wagon. There's 6 kids, mom and dad, all crammed in this station wagon, and I decided I needed some fox urine to make sure that I could catch foxes. And we stopped on the way back, and then we rode for 2.5 hours, and you couldn't get the smell out of that car, and everybody was gagging and puking. Dad was mad. We were all, and what a mess. So I've been the contributor to a story just like you told.
Yeah. Well,
Chris,
my wife.
Oh, go ahead.
My wife has a note. I mean, she'd come in the house and, boy, this house stinks. I can't smell nothing. And but we had like you said, it's a pretty good trip to Rushville, Indiana.
Yeah.
And I'd called a guy, and we didn't get there till 9 or 10 o'clock. And he went through the fur and give you so much for this pile and so much for that pile, as they do. And then he got in the fox, and he said, I'll give you $50 a piece for the 11 fox. That's $550 for those kids, And then pulled out the muskrats, and he turned one of them out, and he said, I'll give you, I don't know, $2 or $3 a piece for the rats. And they got their money and got their check. He gave them a check, and we start out from the house and from the guy's little shop, and them boys are just laughing. And I said, what the heck are y'all laughing about? And they told me, said, well, we trapped one of those muskrats, and that was the one the guy looked at. But he said we shot the other 4 with shotgun off the bank of the farm pond over there. And I said, that ain't going to work, boys. So we turned the truck around, went back, and I told the guy, I said, I didn't know it, but they shot. He said, oh, forget it. That's all right. But they were just cracking up laughing. But anyway, when I got home, it was after midnight back to the house, and I walked in the door, and that smell was still there from those coon hides. It was, I don't know how Kevin and Todd and Shirley slept in that house. But it was terrible. We had to fumigate that house for days.
Hey, Chris, we ought to do an episode on the sights and sounds of coon hunting, because all of it, there's so many stories that could spin off of this. But that's a great story. Well, let's talk about your hunting there and how you started out there hunting on Kentucky River. And I think mainly with your brother Jake, but that we've talked about in the past. But just let's go down that road.
Well, yeah, most everybody knows that, Jake since passed away, but he was 18 years older than I, and he was more like my father than. Not my father was great to it, but Jake was more active, could do more things. My dad was getting up in his 60s, and you know, when you get 60, you're kind of like I am, not very much, but whatever dog they had running loose around the house, and Jake had hound dogs and of some nature. They were cur dogs, what we call today, and I'd just take off and go tree a possum somewhere, or daytime squirrels, or shoot groundhogs and things like that. And I then, as I got on up old enough, I was 13, 14 years old, I would drive my dad's farm truck. He had a 49 International pickup, I guess you'd call it, and nobody hardly had pickups in that days, had cattle racks on it. I put my dogs in there, and I'd drive anywhere 5 or 6 miles over to Kentucky River and go over and go hunting. And I thought nothing about it. I had no driver's license, but I drove a darn truck everywhere. And I'd hunt by myself, or I had several friends that, you know, as your kid would go hunting with you to go hunting. And it just went from there on up. None of those dogs were anything, but they were tree dogs. You had to train them to tree. You know, the difference in then and now is then we had to train dogs to tree. We'd get dogs at a dog pound. Somebody at the dog pound have a houndy-looking dog. They'd call my brother and say, come down. One of the best dogs we ever got, we got out of the pound, ever had, and including today. And I would hunt, and I told you once, Steve, here before. I remember my dad bought the farm that we retired on in '48. That made me 9 years old, and Jake and I was living in South Carolina one day. We had right to hunt on the place, and we were hunting, and I said, darn, do you know, I hunted all these branches and by myself and creeks, and had to get up in the morning, and my dad had a dairy then, and go help feed cows and everything before I went to school. And then all of a sudden it dawned on me, you were about 9 years old when you moved from here. And I remember on that farm, my mom had a little bitty single shot 410 shotgun, lightweight. And I remember going hunting with that shotgun by myself, squirrel hunting, rabbit hunting, with that shotgun by myself before I was 10 years old. And they would be put in jail now, and the keys thrown away for letting kids do that. But that's the way it was. I wasn't the only one. Pardon me. But from there on, I wound up getting another dog. I don't even remember where. It was a spotted houndy looking dog that made a nice tree dog, got run over on the road. That was my first experience with traffic. And then whatever Jake had, he had the dog I was telling you about. He got my dog pound. And I had a nephew that's 4 years older, younger than I. And me and him were going hunting. I mean, I'd drive up and pick him up. He lived 4 or 5 miles from us, and I never, till I was 40 years old and moved to South Carolina, I never asked anybody permission to hunt. I just thought it was something you're supposed to do. Nobody cared. It's just
what a change it is today, right?
Oh, yeah, because they were all farmers and everything, and they knew my dad's truck, and I guess got used to me running through their fields and hunting and everything.
Sure.
But I that got me into it, and like I said, I then got on in. Everybody was starting a night hunt as I'd gotten married, and right on. My favorite nights to hunt was Monday and Thursday, because we played basketball on Tuesday and Friday, and the coach had a curfew. You better not be seen on the streets after 10 o'clock. Well, I wasn't on the streets. I was in the woods those nights.
Go ahead, Chris.
That just set me up terrific there, because now I got something to do on Monday and Thursday night.
That kind of brings up something to me real quick, and I'll throw in here, Chris, and I don't know if this was your experience or not, but, with Facebook now, I've reconnected with a lot of kids that I went to high school with. You know, I went to a big high school. We had over 400 in our graduating class. And I knew a lot of these kids, you know, and they'd see me at school and we'd do different things together and stuff. But, you know, my hunting was something I did all through high school. And these people don't, you know, they can't relate to me doing that because they didn't have any idea that I was doing those things. You know, I mean,
Sure.
I was out on Friday and Saturday nights with my dad, and I don't know what they were doing. You know, some of them were probably we didn't have drugs or anything like that back then, but we did. You know, kids are always teenagers. They like to get out and party a bit and stuff. But you know, and it was like a thing that I did, but I didn't really advertise it, and I don't know why. I wasn't ashamed of it.
This sounds
just
No, me too.
This sounds like a typical coon hunter story right here. About you're trying to tell us that you went to a high school in West Virginia that graduated 400 people all at one time.
Yes, isn't that
that's like an annual deal for West Virginia. Take the whole state and they don't have 400 graduates.
I was going to say he must have graduated 3 or 4 times.
Hey, man, we were in a hub there.
We won't hold that
West
against
Virginia.
you, Steve. We won't hold that against you. We won't hold that against you.
All right. Well, I understand. You know, well, we learned sum and cipher. Yeah, they taught us 3 things, the 3 R's: reading, writing, and Route 21 to Cleveland. That was the deal.
I just watched Jeff Foxworthy thing last night after all the other comedian things, and it's okay. You might be a redneck. That's fine.
Yeah, well, I might be. That
might be a redneck.
No might about that. Ain't no might about that. Well, look, okay. Talk about the Kentucky River and that region. And, you know, I grew up over there in the hills of West Virginia and read the magazines, and all the coon hunting was going on in Kentucky and Ohio and Illinois and places like that, you know. I remember first time I went coon hunting in Kentucky to an event there was around Georgetown and hunting on those big, beautiful horse farms, and that was like Disney World to me. But talk about, you know, the Kentucky River hunting and all that. That's interesting to me.
Well, something to relate to is back then in the 50s and 60s. If you wanted to tree a coon in central Kentucky, you had to go to Kentucky River or one of the rivers. And it was rough. There was rock ledges. I know that from time to time, to get to the next level, you almost had to climb a tree to get to the over the ledges. And these dogs are different because the coon escape route a lot of times was up a tree and out on the ledge and gone again. And they'd leave dogs treed on the tree that they went up, obviously, to get out. And some of these dogs, several of them, that's why you needed smart dogs. They knew the difference for some way and would work their way around the ledge and get up. It was rough. It had corn bottoms, a lot of corn raised in there. And the thing, if you know the flow of the river with all the ledges and things, one side would be up against the rock cliff, so to speak, and the other side would be an open bottom. And then when it made the next turn, I guess over years, the flow of the water would turn back towards the rock ledge part. And you'd have maybe quarter mile, half a mile of corn in those bottoms, and it was perfect hunting. And they had all kinds of getaways under those rock ledges and a lot of big timber in there and a huge timber. And I guess timber that probably still hadn't been cut. You couldn't get it out if you tried hardly. But we would hunt those places, and boy, it was a treat for me as a young kid, someone to take me to Kentucky River to hunt. You know, we tree coon over there. We tree possums here on the farms. And boy, can you imagine 13, 12, 13, 14 years old? Jake saying, "We're going out tonight." Yeah, I thought, "You sure?" And where are we going? Let's go over to, we had different names for all of them, Bowman Woods and Polly's Bend McCown's Ferry. There was a ferry down there that we hunted. That was the name of those places, and people in Mercer County still know where they are, I'm pretty sure. But that was hunting in style there. It was rougher neck too.
What kind of equipment?
There.
Right. What kind of equipment? What kind of equipment did you have back then?
22 single shot and a 2-cell flashlight or carbide light. I never could stand the smell of those things. Mm-hmm. But yeah, then we got real smart and we got these PR12 bulbs, and we started putting extensions on these 2-cell flashlights to make them brighter and longer, and put a dog leash around them, tie them around your back. Sometimes 6 or 7 battery flash, D batteries in one light, and that was the only equipment we had, buddy. And there wasn't no waders and knee boots and all that stuff,
Yeah, I didn't get my first pair of hip boots even until I moved to Michigan in 1983. That might be hard to believe, but of course, that's before Wick invented the frog legs. I got to throw this in because it was funny to me. You talk about that slinging that long flashlight over your shoulder, and that's what most people carried back in those days. And you can see
it had a big head on it, like a copper. It was a copper
reflector
head,
or
headlight on the car.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Well, I went to a hunt one night up in eastern Ohio, and there was a big hunt up there called the Southeastern Ohio Championship. And the first trophy that I won in a night hunt, I won 6th place up there with a plot dog. But I remember going out on a hunt one night with a guy. Now, think about this. This is before anything like a hound sounder or Walker's Game Ear or any of these amplifying devices to help your hearing. This guy was on the cast, and he had it was made of aluminum, but it looked like a bell, and it was probably 24 inches across the open side of this bell. And I think it was a horn or something that it came out of a factory. This thing, I'm not kidding you, it was probably, what's that diameter? 24 inches, 18 to 24 inches. And then it came back like a funnel. It looked like a big funnel. And he had a dog chain riveted to the mouthpiece, up the small end and the big end, and he had that slung over his back, and he would put that up to his ear to hear his dog. And when he's going through the woods, you can hear this chain clang, 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 clang. I thought that was kind of unique. Some of the things forgive me, guys, for going down that rabbit path. But when you talked about the guy having that thing slung over his back, that came to mind. Well, let's talk about. I know that the dogs that you hunted with, at some point in time, I guess through Jake, you got involved in registered walker dogs. How did that involve?
I had a registered walker dog before Jake did, actually. I had an opportunity to get a female. Her name was Belle, or just plain old Kentucky Belle. And she was 10, 11 months old at the time. And she really became a nice dog. She was the first dog I ever remember in Central Kentucky being a dual champion. I made her night champion and a show champion, which was hard to do back then. We're not talking about 3 or 4 dogs at a hunt. We're talking 60 or 70 a lot of times. Mm-hmm. And the shows would be 40, 50 dogs in the shows. And they'd even have a grade show and a grade hunt. A lot of times there'd be more dogs in the grade hunt show than there was in the registered back then. The registered was the elite. In the early 60s. You're probably not old enough to be around then, but that's how the hunts got started. We had a tobacco warehouse at Art Roberts. You may remember Art Roberts was a plot guy
Yeah.
And an auctioneer there in Kentucky. And we'd have a hunt in that old tobacco warehouse. And the dogs that would show up were great dogs. That's what they had. Well, a $5 entry fee for the club. We don't care what you're on. And more great dogs were entered. And it eventually changed then up until the later early 70s, I guess it was. Hardly a great dog ever showed up. They'd have a hunt, but there would hardly be any. And that's the way it just evolved from a registered dog, because everybody wanted a registered dog to be important, you know. Don't give it to he's a coon or not. I want a registered dog. And that's the way that happened. But I hunted a story different from that. I had a red bone female, red bone in color, and she got bred by Jake's dog, the one we got from Dog Pound. So you know how much coon dog we had behind those. And she had 5 puppies. I gave one to the athletic director at school, and another one, two of them I gave to my nephews. Don't remember what I did with the other one. I had one I couldn't give away, a little black ugly thing. And my wife was pregnant with Lenny. And I got a picture of her kneel down out in the grass in the front yard. And he was probably 6, 7 weeks old. And we named him Jigger. She did. Where the name come from, I don't know. But he may be the best coonhound I ever owned in my life. And we lived in a farm, on a farmhouse. And nobody had air conditioning. They have the screen doors open and everything. And she and that dog cut a hole in the screen door so he could go in and out.
That sounds like my house.
And I would go hunting on Kentucky River or any of the rivers, and she knew every hunting spot because we didn't have tracking equipment and everything. I'd lose a dog. He'd be out looking for a coon. We didn't. You run 2 or 3 coon tracks a night, you had a good night. And my wife would get my sister, and they would go get him the next morning. I would lay something out of the truck or something, a car. I would hunt out of a truck, hunt out of a car. And my wife and sister go get the dog the next morning. That's how important he was to the family, and he was that way. And this is a story I know that you would like to have, Steve. We had bought a house in town. I mean, we were uptown now. We're big time. I'm working for Square D, making $1.62 an hour, and had a dog house in the backyard. And Jigger stayed in the dog house, as all dogs were back then. We didn't have a kennel at that time. Well, my sister was always a troublemaker. I had 2 boys at the time, and for Easter, she got them a duck and a chicken apiece. You remember when they colored those ducks and chickens and things?
Oh, yeah.
Gave each one of them one apiece. Well, the chickens and the duck died, and one duck lived. That duck lived with that dog and thought he was a dog. He slept in the dog house with Jigger all through summer and the next winter. And Jake, my brother at that time, owned a school bus route. And the people working for him would come down our street. They would blow their horn in front of my house because they knew me. And that duck and dog would come out, and the duck going whack, 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 and the dog barking every morning. Make Shirley sit down mad, wake her up. Well, sometimes later, toward the spring, one of my brother-in-laws had a dairy farm, and it had a pond right out behind, maybe 50 yards or so from the barn. He said, "Why don't you bring the duck down here and turn him loose?" Well, okay, that sounds good. We took the duck down. That duck didn't know how to swim, never would get on that pond. And he ran with his dog. He had a dog that come to the barn with him. Well, he called me one morning. He said, "I got some bad news. The duck got run over this morning." The milk truck would come in and pull into the driveway of the house and back into the barn to load the milk. The dog and the duck would chase the milk truck. And he said, "Well, he got run over chasing the milk truck." Run over the duck.
A duck. Oh, man.
I know that's getting away, but that's the story the way things were back then.
That's your story, and you're going to stick to it, right?
That duck was something, yes.
Well, listen, now there's two stories here that I want to get into, and it involves the dogs. And I want to know which one kind of started first or which way we ought to go first. There's the story of the origin of the Buck Creek Walker dogs. And we talked about that before when you and I got together to do a magazine article for American Cooner. And then there's the story of the Kentucky River dogs with Elmer Harrod and how that all evolved. Which one of those should we tackle
Well,
first?
the Kentucky River happened first, obviously. Because I never called. I know his name was Elmer C, as he'd advertised his dogs. I know everybody called him Mr. Jack, but I never called him nothing but Mr. Howard because of the age difference and respect. I don't know how you could explain anything like Mr. Howard. He was just that kind of a, I guess, gentleman or fella. And he always had a couple of three handlers, and some of them went on to win a lot of hunts and things for him. Well, when I would go to the hunts and go out with them, obviously, and things, and we and he was showing dogs. He had Finn River Joe, who was Kentucky River Joe when he owned him, and just a terrific person, human being, I guess. And he was at the Shelby County Coon Hunters Club, old and getting kind of feeble. And I came in off a cast for, I don't know, talking to him, and he said, Lee, and all my dogs are named Kentucky Timber, Dinah, and those dogs. That's what Fred had kind of thrown on them. And he said, I want you to carry on my kennel name. Will you do that for me? And I said, sure. Well, that'd be great. And that's how the Kentucky River kennels got started. Mr. Howard started it way back in the early 70s.
Now, Lee, let me jump in here just a minute. Now, for our listeners out there who may not recognize who you're talking about, his last name was spelled Harrod, Harrod.
Correct.
And he was an elderly gentleman when I met him, and he would come to the events like plot days or different events, and he had a camper. He had a camper on his truck, as I remember, a cap or something, and he had these beautiful tricolored Walker dogs. And the ones I remember, Kentucky River Jack and Kentucky River Jill. Now, and he was the consummate Southern gentleman, just the nicest, friendliest, kind of a heavy set fella, older guy, and he played the fiddle. And my dad played the fiddle too. And so at plot days, they'd have at night after the cast would go out, they'd have a little get together, those that played instruments. Especially remember this at Flora, Illinois, and they'd play and all. But those are my memories of Mr. Harrod, and he really was, to just emphasize what you're saying, just one of the nicest people I ever met in the sport. But you go ahead now.
Well, he also would stay at the clubhouses, and back in those days, there was great food at those clubhouses. The women, the wives, my wife served several times. We'd come and prepare food. They'd have breakfast when you came in. And to throw in something here that the younger people wouldn't even know, and we had 4-hour hunts. We couldn't just, there were 4 hours of competition. It wasn't 2 hours and anything. But he would stay at the clubhouse and entertain the ladies with all kinds of tricks and knives and different things he whittled out. I don't know whether you remember that or not.
I don't.
But anyway, he started the Kentucky River dogs. They were Finley River bred. He loved the Finley River dogs, and I hunted. I was working in Frankfort at that time at Bendix Corporation, and I would, after work, I worked night shift for 19 months, the afternoon shift, so to speak. I would go pick up Mr. Howard, and I'd had the dog we called Hitler, who was the brother to Buck Creek Drum. I mean, not Buck Creek Drum, to Boone Creek Mike. And pick up him, and he'd get one of his dogs, and we'd go on the Kentucky River. Elkhorn Creek was big in Frankfort, run into Kentucky River, and he and I would hunt. And he was just, that was before we changed the kennel name, as a matter of fact. But the dogs he had, and he showed them. I told you about him showing Joe at the Boyle County Coon Hunters Club, and he couldn't have been. He carried him in his arms and go over to his truck and check the dipstick out, take a Kleenex, a napkin, and get the oil on it and shine the black up. And he would shine that black right around to the white, dare not to get any on the white. And he made Kentucky River Joe a grand show champion. And Joe was a fabulous dog. He was, I know, well, he wrote history himself. He don't have to have nothing from me to blow him up when John Monroe got him. And then in 72, and I think the dates are right. It may have been 71 or 73, but around 72, wherever the Walker Days was in Rushville, Indiana, Fred took a litter mate to Boone Creek Mike.
Now this is Fred Sims, your name.
Fred Sims, yeah, right. Yeah, oh yeah, my buddy Fred. He's Fred Sims. I don't want him to listen to this. He probably won't. But he's probably the most knowledgeable person to ever turn a dog loose. And I don't think he hunted him but one hunt in his whole life. He would go to him. But anyway, we bred the female to Joe, and that's where the Dinah dog and the starting, actually, the original of the Buck Creek line. It started. She was the grandmother of Buck Creek Drum. And that was in 1972. And one of the most intelligent, I've never been a person, you and I have talked, I will not tolerate a dumb dog. I just can't. These wild, crazy running dogs don't fit my style. And she was so smart. And then we bred her. Actually, we didn't breed Dinah. We bred the other female because I didn't want to breed Dinah. I was hunting her. I sister to her, litter mate. At this time, we did breed her to Gold Creek Monroe, and that's where Rock came from, Kentucky River Rock. And as you know, Rock was, we bred him to a Finley River female, and that's where Buck Creek Drum come from, that litter, the original Buck Creek dog. And he was born in my backyard. In my kennels, I kept him, and my nephew was young, hunted, had started, different nephew from Johnny, started hunting with me, and had been for years, and it was his dog. I give it to him, and he sold him to Charlie Butler, Buck Creek Drum, at about 14, 15 months old. He was running the Trinity Coons. He was a nice hound. He didn't have the looks that I really wanted. And he was a good-looking dog, but he wasn't no show dog, as far as put on the bench. But that's where Buck Creek Drum came from. Mm-hmm. And his granddaddy was Gold Creek Monroe, and his great-granddaddy, Buck Creek, Finley River Joe. And
now, Joe was out of Finley River Chief, right?
Who, Joe?
Yeah, I think Joe was out of Finley River Chief, wasn't he? Yeah. No,
he wasn't out of Chief. He was out of jail.
Okay, was he?
And God, what was the other dog?
Jack.
Yeah, Jill.
Jack and Jill. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. And Mr. Howard would go to Florida. He had a place down there in the wintertime, and one of Jack and a dog he called Trampus got burned up in a dog box. People smoking, throwing cigarettes out, and they died in the fire in the dog box. And Mr. Howard was hunting Trampus a lot, promoting him, training him. And then that's when he had to go back to Joe, and because he didn't have Trampus no longer. They were brothers. They were litter mates. And I never hunted with Trappist, as a matter of fact. He was real young.
Well, let's talk about some of the early hunts that you went to, Lee. We talked recently about your early trip to Redbone Days and some of those things and how you traveled and those hunts back in the day. I know that we guys our age remember those days, and they're probably for the younger listeners that we have out there, this stuff probably doesn't relate at all. How could you do some of the things that you guys did? Well, it's almost like us reading the history of the people that traveled across the United States in a covered wagon. You think, how did they do that? How did they survive? But things were a lot more basic back then. Talk about a little bit about those early hunts that you went to.
I would hunt in the bigger hunts in central Kentucky, but Jake and I and my nephew and two other guys, 5 of us, I had a 59 Chevrolet, and Shirley and I, and we went to Redbone Days in Corden, Indiana, and a guy named Bud Rosenberger was one of the officer in Redbone. I think he was the president. And 5 of us put 5 dogs in the trunk of a 59 Chevrolet and went from Harrodsburg, Kentucky to Corden, Indiana, probably 40 miles over there. And when you got to those places, Steve, everybody now, I'm taking my truck. We would the whole cast would go out maybe in 2 vehicles, Oh, come on, go with me, ride with me, ride. And that's the way it was. But we put a 2x4 and tied the trunk down with a 2x4 in it so the dogs could get air. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, after I told you about this, all 5 dogs were males, and they hopped over in the trunk, laid down, and there was no dog growling, dog fighting, and all that stuff. And I placed. That was my first big win. The Jigger's a little black dog. I placed second in the hunt over there. I still got the trophy. That's the one I never gave away. It was about trophies, probably 15 inches tall, something like that. And to do that, I was, my first one. And that's the way we would go to the hunt to drive a car. And then later, as Shirley was telling me, I had got a Mercury station wagon, we called them back then. And I'd built a small wire cage in the back of it, let the tailgate down, and I hunted out of that Mercury station wagon. And my wife being a Catholic, we would go to church, and she was from Lebanon, and that was a big Catholic town down there. And the 2 nuns, the teachers there at the school, found out that after church we would always go down to her house, Shirley's house. Well, the nuns, they wanted to hitch a ride with us, which was great. The nuns would get in the back seat of the car, and the dog box, dog smell and all, and behind them, and we would take them down to see their friends. And when we got ready to go, 5 or 6 o'clock, run by and pick them up. They're ready to go, and get in the back of that Mercury wagon that I'd hunted with the night before. And
maybe that's where the name Bad.
That's the way you hunted back then. And another story there. I never drank. I mean, I drank a beer, maybe. I haven't had a drink of liquor in 25 years. Never drank then, except parties and things. But for some reason, Shirley opened up the glove compartment of the car, and there was a half pint of liquor in there, and the nuns in the back, and nothing to do them but take it home with them. They had to have that for cooking for their cakes and things.
Yeah.
So then we wound up getting the nuns. We would always get them a half a pint or so. Harrodsburg, Kentucky was dry and no alcohol at all. So you'd have to go to bootleggers to get any kind of a drink like that. But we supplied the nuns in church there with their liquor, and but it was never over a half a pint or so. You know, that's all we could afford. That's the way hunting was back then.
Well, you know, I hunted out of a station wagon for many years. That's the way my dad hunted up until about 1972 was when my dad bought his first pickup. You know, we had station wagons and we put up, now this wasn't the primary family car. My mother, she was a little too proud for that.
Mine was.
Yeah.
I'd say mine was the only one we had.
Yeah, and when you get back to that story about those coon hides in that house, I remember of those trips coming back from Monroe County, about a 2-hour drive on twisting roads, and those dogs were wet in the back of that cage there in that station wagon. And then that Joy or whatever dog food started passing through them in a gaseous form. And you'd have to, tears would be rolling down your face.
You know, Steve, the old story goes, there's nothing smells worse than a wet dog. Yes, they do. Frozen coon hides do.
Yeah, for sure.
I guarantee you.
Well,
that's the way we hunted then, and we moved on up. Sometimes in 67, 66, 67. We gathered up enough money that I got it was a 64 Ford pickup truck, and it had a small camper on it. It had sleepers and things overhead that I would drive to the hunts. And you're talking about Mr. Howard. Fred and I went to Autumn's Oak. It was in Greencastle, and Mr. Howard was there, and evidently he didn't have his camper or whatever. But anyway, I told him, I said, I'm going, Fred and I are going hunting, but we're not driving my truck. Go down and get in the camper and take them to go to sleep, rest. So Fred had went out with somebody. Fred would go out on cast with these famous dogs to see them go. That was Fred's way. And Fred said he came in from the cast and went to get in the camper, and there laid Mr. Howard in there, and said he sure looked rough. You know, he said, scared the holy devil out of me. Somebody in your camper sleeping, but that was just the way we hunted back then. But it was good. You know, I wouldn't trade nothing for it. We didn't have. I wasn't the only one. Everybody hunted the same way. They all of them friends. That's the way they went.
Sure. So, I've told the story about we mentioned Penny's friend there that he caught the coon hides with when I was a kid. This kid, Chuck, and we had an old Plymouth Barracuda. It was Chuck's car, and we put the dogs under that hatch, in that Barracuda. Sure. And we'd drive to a night hunt, and we had a little old pup tent that we'd throw out there. And that's how we camped out on the grounds. And then some guy like Henry Hitt from over in Richwood, West Virginia, with the Cherry River Tree and Walkers, and had a big magnetic sign on the side of his truck. And he got out and he had a store-bought dog box on the back, and he let these two big walkers out, and he's got a can opener there, opening cans of Alpo and putting it down for them, and we're sitting over there, and it's almost like the old movie, like Wayne's World or something. We're sitting there bowing and saying, we're not worthy, I mean, Mr. Coon Hunter, but you idolized those guys back in that day. And the first pair of Carhartts I ever got, it was like getting a Brooks Brothers suit or something. I mean, it's just a different time, Lee, just a different time.
Sure, and everything changed, like we're talking about basketball from then to now, the rules and regulations and the kids and everything. We just played basketball to have something to do, and we got started hunting the same way, have something to do. We didn't have computers and televisions and everything. When you're a kid growing up, we finally got a TV, and I remember it was like, 8-inch, 9-inch screen. And every Friday night, my dad would take us boys and go down to my brother-in-law's and watch the cavalcade of sports.
Mm-hmm. Watch the fights.
Yeah, watch the fights. And I'll just tell you something here interesting. My brother-in-law was an engineer on his own mine. And back then, the TVs were, you could only get the Lexington, Louisville, Cincinnati channels. And you had to turn the antenna to face each station.
Yeah.
And my brother-in-law drilled a hole through his house and ran a bar through the hole to the rod to change the antenna from inside of his house. And now they don't know about that. But anyway, back to the dogs. When we'd go to the hunts and everything, everybody was buddies. I'm sorry, everybody was friends, big time. And hey, go with me. We wouldn't take 10 cars through the woods, or we'd take 2 at the most. Everybody go together. You didn't have to have a ride. Once you got to the hunt, you had a ride. But you're talking about the pup tents. In '65, the World Championship was in Lee Summit, Missouri, and ACHA World was the only one. And that was the year that Spot won it, Finn River Spot. And that's the time that I really met John Monroe. He'd been advertising chief and things, and full crowd, whatever. And a guy named Bobby Durham, who was as big as Fred. Fred's a big boy. And myself, and we slept in a tent on the ground, and we had to get down on our hands and knees to get in the tent to sleep. And John and his brother Lee pulled in a Ford truck, and it had a cover on it, a plywood cover, and hay in there, loose hay, and they slept in there with their dog, and they slept back then right beside of our tent that we slept in. And one of my, or I guess it was Fred's, I didn't have no rich friends, had a motel rented there. And we went down afternoon to watch Bob Gibson pitch in the World Series at the motel. And there must have been 15 of us in there all around the doors and outside the door watching the baseball game during the day.
Yeah.
And things. Now I wouldn't. My God, I go and take my wife. She won't stay in some of the places we stay in. It changed that way.
Well, we could do several shows and talking about the way that things were back in those days, Lee, and it sure was a different world. There was such an excitement about getting to a hunt. When you got to the hunt, you just couldn't wait to see the dogs that were there, the people that were there, to drive around and walk around, see the dogs that were tied up, and listen to the guy's story, about his hound and all that. So I could say now, we tend to just go and show up in time to get the dog entered and get it on. And if we win, we had a good time. If we didn't win, we didn't. Yeah. And then, so it's a whole different world. Well, you've always had the philosophy of not only having a good hound, and of course, with your background of hunting, we've established that you are a coon hunter, or have been pretty much all your life. But at some point in time, this thing about having the good-looking dog too came into the equation for you. What's that story all about?
Well, I'd like to. I would be at the shows or hunts back in the day, and I would show dogs for Johnny and I, my nephew. People come in and say, "Well, I'd show so and so, but I don't know nothing about it. I can't do this, can't do that." And I'm young, and the master hound bench show judge, "Well, Lee'll show him for you." "Yeah, I'll show him." So I got showing dogs, and I got excited over it, and I didn't want an ugly dog. I never did. And I had cattle that were beautiful. My dad did, and I didn't want ugly dogs. And I was so bad at it, Steve. If I was going to hunt, wasn't going to show the dog, they'd give him a bath or take him to the hunt. I don't know whether that's a little eccentric or crazy or what, but I would do it, and I probably still would. But
well, you took pride in your stock, you know.
I used to, Lee, I used to wash all my dogs before I would go to any breed days hunts and things like that. I think that's pretty common. I mean, maybe not common, but it's. I get what you're saying. You don't want to roll in there. You roll in looking professional and pride in what you got.
When I was advertising, we did the only dog I ever put in the magazines, and I'd put in breed books or things. It was when Gary and Sheila had Rowdy, and we were they were pushing him. They did most all the work on him and everything, but. I always wanted to put in my ad, and my wife wouldn't let me. There's two things in this world you don't have to do. You don't have to be married to an ugly woman, and you don't have to hunt an ugly dog. And she wouldn't let me put it in there, but I would put you don't have to hunt an ugly dog, you know. And I just, when I turned my dog loose from way back in early in my career, I wanted to lead the prettiest darn dog out there on the cast, and then win the cast with him, and that stuck with me. I can't change from it. And my wife, you know, she don't like it. If I happen to have one little ugly, she didn't like him at all. But Steve, I told you the story about Smooth Lady. You know, when I got her being ugly, and I don't know what's in me about that, and you know, I did it, and you know, Tommy, my buddy, that showed dogs with us, he's kind of gotten the same way, and of course he's shown dogs with me all these years, but I don't know Lee, what it is. I can't explain it.
I think the bench shows themselves evolved from the fact, and maybe they came more out of the foxhound world. I'm not sure. But I think, you know, the guys would go to a hunt or a trial. Back in the day, it was field trials a lot more than the night hunts. And they'd say, well, old Joe over there's got a good-looking dog, you know, that's a good-looking hound. And somebody says, yeah, he's all right, but I believe mine's better looking than he is. And they'd get a bale of straw and a couple bales of straw and put the dogs up and look at them. And then first thing you know, there was a couple cinder blocks with a 2x12 or something laid across them. And, you know, little by little, but there's always been that inherent desire, I think, within the houndsman to have a good looking hound, you know.
Well, and still today, and I've you know, Shirley and I were talking just since you did the article that about puppies. Every dog that I've campaigned in the shows and hunts, except maybe one or two, I raised from a puppy, and it don't take me long. I've got a puppy coming, and should be born out of Willie and a litter mate to Natalie's dog that won Autumn's Oak this year. They'll be born this coming weekend, sometime Friday or Saturday. And I want that puppy when he's 5 weeks old, at least. No, not much older. Because you create that bond with that dog, then, you know, and I've seen this over and over and over again. This one, and training starts the day they're born. The same way with children. You go in restaurants and kids hollering and screaming and yelling and things like that. And, he's too young to know the difference. That's when he's on top of you and you're not on top of him when you think that. And I want my puppies, and I've trained them, and I want them at 5 or 6 weeks old, not much older than that, because then they formed a bad habit. And I go back to when I moved to South Carolina. I lost the book, but I had it was a small, thin book. The guy, Corey, is that the right name, Steve? You go back to the big game hunter out west back in the day.
Yeah, Corey, right.
Had done this book, and he said, if you got two puppies, you never put them together. You put one on one end of the kennel and one on the other, because the best puppy will never be no better than the worst one if they're together all the time. and how true that is, you know. I know I'm getting away from good-looking dogs, but that starts right there with brains. And I just, you know, every time I would breed a female, even from Joe was a good-looking dog. That's all I started showing. I would take the best I had, and you can't be on top if you think you're on top. There's people got better than you got, so you want to reach out and get the better of what you like. And I like Joe. I liked his looks. He was a good-looking rascal. And we bred the female. Actually, Fred did, but I got 2 of the puppies, and he got Ted 2. And then I, you know, from take that to breed a dog like Monroe. As a matter of fact, we were going to breed Dinah to Spring Creek Rock, but I couldn't. Dwayne Clark was going to a fur sale somewhere that weekend, and you know you can't wait. So I called and got a set up to go to Arkansas and breed the Monroe, and that's where Rock came from. And to say that Monroe, you know, he won the world show and placed 7th in the hunt. And then I became friends with Billy Stinson, who's on Spring Creek Radar, and had a closer relationship with Billy. He still do. I don't know whether Billy's still living, but a few years ago he came to the St. Jude and we talked. And he lost his wife, but one of the up there with Mr. Howard type of person. And anybody that ever saw Radar knew he was beautiful. Steve, you'd seen him.
Beautiful hound.
From that, yeah, and from a female out of that cross came Rowdy to Rock. So just to go from there right on through, that was just my desire to do. And I don't know, something that I've got 3 dogs in the Southeastern Trim Walker Hall of Fame, and I don't know why that Rowdy wouldn't be considered one of the greatest hounds to never, you know, to never be recognized as such with his hunting and show records. Gary and I hunted him and showed him 19 times in qualifying events and qualified 17 times for the World AKC and UKC championship. I've known dogs that won the world that took 5 or 6 trips to get qualified.
And you're saying there that he qualified for the night hunt as well as the shows, right?
Sure. Yeah. And never lost but twice in the whole time. You know, and 17 times he was qualified.
Well, I think that's probably what some folks, especially younger people in the sport, don't know about you, Lee, is that you did have this line of dogs that was starting with the Rock dog and then Rowdy and then Rowdy's son Boomer and right on down the line. And these dogs were dual purpose dogs. They were absolutely coon dogs. They made night hunt titles. I know as we wrote an article recently for American Cooner, you talked about how they placed at major hunts like the Grand American and Southeastern Walker Days in the night hunt portion, and then come back the next day or the next year and win the show. So I think that's pretty well established for those that have been paying attention, that, you know, your dogs have been truly dual purpose hounds.
I never had to advertise for one dog around it from Kentucky River Line. I was never interested in it. I was not. And Gary and Sheila were great friends. I talked to Gary text a couple of days ago actually, and I never pushed the Kentucky River Lines. We didn't go out and breed females, and I may have raised 8-9 litters of pups in my whole life. I had no desire to have puppies. And Steve, I told you in 1967 or 8, whichever year it was, I sold 2 dogs, and I didn't have a dog for 3 or 4 days. It was the only time of my life. and I've never sold a dog since, other than puppies. I don't have nothing against it, but when I love the dogs I got that I keep that I hunt, and I don't want to see them abused and being sold and traded and kicked around, I give them to people. You know, you talked about David McKee. David had a lady when she died. Jerry Boyd had Candy and Rowdy both out there hunting them. I was doing a lot because they got old and feeble. But and Boomer was the only dog that ever died at my house. I just put him down. But the Jigger dog, I had a friend that worked with the Square D. I let him take him when he got older and enjoy hunting him. I guess that's the reason the Kentucky River dogs were never promoted. We didn't promote them. I didn't want to. Actually, I didn't need to. I had other things to do, and I wanted to win shows. I wanted to win hunts, and you know, Rowdy placed second in the Lee Crawford Invitational, which had to be qualified to get in, and then turned around and won the show that weekend.
Sure.
Then, like I said, Boomer won the Grand American bench show one year, and the next year, Harold Kay and I hunted him in the hunt and placed fourth in the hunt. Yeah, and that's not a little hunt. And then the Boomer won the show at Southeastern Trent Walker Days, and the next year he was the night champion winner. So yeah, we campaigned while we hunted, you know.
Yeah. Well, you know, you mentioned here some of your friends, and of course you're talking about Gary Cook of Indiana and his wife, Sheila Hicks Cook. Sheila's dad, Monty, was well known back in the day as a supply person, dog supplies and all. And those were back in what I call the heyday of competition hunting and coon hunting, sure, as far as UKC was concerned in the 80s, back there when you know, the crowds were huge and the barns were full of stud dogs, and you know, the Purina race was cranking up and going strong, and all those things. But you talked about you know, friends like that, and I think when you and I really got to be closer friends, I believe, was when I went to PKC and started the bench show program there. And you know, and I needed someone to kind of help me along with that. PKC didn't have a bench show program, and they wanted one, and they wanted to set up a format that paid money to the winners like they do in the night hunt. So, and you were a huge help to me there by, you know, hauling the benches around and all. But we had some good hunts and good times back in those days, didn't we?
Oh man, didn't we ever? We were talking, you and I just recently about I think it was Versailles, so I know it was something on the Wabash River with Gary Hearn, you know, and Kevin Swartz, a young man that was handling dogs from Michigan for Gary, going out, you know, after all the activity was done. I don't know, Steve, how many times we do that? 20, 30 times during time?
Yeah. Well, for the listeners, what we would do, we'd put these shows on, these large shows at places like the Spring Classic or the Sunshine Jamboree down in Thomasville, Georgia, or wherever.
In a tent?
In a tent, rent a circus tent, and all. And then when we got the work done, so to speak, before the show the next day, we'd go coon hunting, and or the entries were out and all. And that's when I got the chance to hunt with Rowdy and Boomer on several occasions, and then so and it was on one of those trips down to Thomasville, Georgia, that you took me down to Johnny Brinkley's.
Oh,
you remember that?
Oh my God, yes, I remember all those trips. That you couldn't ask for anything, any resort you wanted to go to that had big time on TV and all that. You couldn't go anywhere and enjoy as much as you go to Johnny and Quita's. And for the people that don't know, Johnny is just he's just something else. I mean, Quita too. And you know that we run in and out of their house like rats, and we for years would go Thanksgiving. We'd have Thanksgiving down there, and HL and Diane Myers would come, and Steve. It was just to go for Thanksgiving. We went out on the little ramp he had out back to the gazebo, and HL and him and I. And the first year we never fried a turkey. We fried 3 turkeys out there. And we're outside eating, sitting on the, the back porch, so to speak. And there was 50, 60 people there. And I said, Johnny, are all of these your grandkids or he said, Lee, half these people I don't even know. They're people that my kids and grandkids had invited to come over. That was just the way they were. And then you go hunting at night, you know.
Oh wow!
And
go ahead.
They bought 300 and some acres and put an 8-foot, you've seen it, welded wire fence all around it. Well, Johnny and they have nothing. There's nothing but hunting on it. They don't do anything else with it. Got deer and the coon hunting. And Johnny was telling me, said had some Guatemalans in there helping him with the fence. And he said, we got back in the back, and boy, there was a swamp back there. They rate coon hunting by the swamp, how big the swamp is or so. And he said, it was great. So I went back down and told Quita, I said, let's go up to the sales office and buy about 50 more acres back there. Well, they went to the sales office, and the guy told him, said, no, we're only selling it in a minimum 150 acres. And Johnny said, well, we'll just take 150 more acres of it then. They wound up 512 acres with an 8-foot welded wire fence. And your dogs can't get out. If they get out of pocket, so to speak, you run back over to the truck and get another one or two.
Boy.
And then,
yeah.
Then I know I don't know whether you ever down hunt with Jake Lewis from down on the coast or not.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But Jake had this thing, a shootout. He called it Jake Lewis Shootout. And he'd send out invitations to people, 20, 25 people to come and hunt in a shootout. And I don't know why these hunt clubs and everything hasn't adopted these rules and regulations in my whole life. And I never thought of it. Jake did. And the way you did it, they would have a low country brawl out in the woods, dirt, everything poured out on the table that they may have tried to wipe off. And everybody would eat, all the 20 or 30 people. And then, how many dogs we got? Well, we got 18, 20. And the way they would do it, they would draw in casts. There wasn't no entry fee. You draw in casts. Well, cast 1 hunted first. Everybody went together. Everybody went to the same spot together. They'd turn the dogs loose in cast 1. And the dogs would go, whatever dog struck and treed, or after that first coon, that cast was over, and whoever won advanced. And then the second number 2 cast would turn loose and advance. He'd come down to the final cast. Some casts wouldn't last 10 or 15 minutes because, you would tree in there on those swamps pretty quick. And then you advance to the next cast. And then you would get down to the final 3 or 4 dogs, whatever was in the last cast, and everybody go back and eat again. I had to go back to the table where you'd left all that food and eat again, and then have the final cast. And my grandson hunted Dan down there. You remember Dan, I know, in the hunt, and won the hunt with Dan, and got a jacket and all kinds. Jake Lewis Shootout champion, but the cast had no time limit. It was just the first coon. The first track you got after was the end of that cast. But everybody hunted together and socialized, and we had so. And then Johnny Starr did later, did the same thing.
Well, my experience with that, Lee, I'm interrupting you here though, but what a joy it was. We went from Thomasville down that one night. We just drove down and hunted a little bit. Your son Lenny was there, and H.L. Meyer and Johnny and Jake and the different. I don't know if Jake was there that first year or not, and his son Kenny and all. But we, that became a tradition for us for many years. The weekend
you and David would go down.
Yeah. The UKC Winter Classic was held in Albany, Georgia, and we began going down there. And then when I went to PKC, the Southern Heritage Hunt, the Sunshine Jamboree was in Thomasville. So, and then it became an every January thing to go to Johnny and Laquita's. They have a beautiful rustic home out in the country outside of Tallahassee. Log house for sure. More hospitable people you will never meet in your life. Laquita would always make for Lee, for you, that huge coconut cake every year.
Brought it to the Winter Classic the first year or 1 year down there. Brought this whole sheet cake. She knew I love coconut cake, and she even gave Lenny the recipe, and now he bakes one every year for at Christmas. But bring that cake, and everybody's sitting around the ring eating coconut cake, and they're trying to show dogs.
Yeah, one other little vignette there is when we would hunt on that 500 acres, we'd get out there and make a couple of drops, and then he'd say, "Well, let's go back up here to and make a fire." And Jake would haul out this cooler full of fresh oysters that were just
I never
caught.
liked them things.
You didn't like them? Oh my!
No.
It was an acquired taste for me, but those, as the guy told me at the BBCHA one time about the catfish fry that he offered me a plate of, and it was delicious. And he said, "Son, those fish slept last night in the White River." And those oysters slept that night before in the Apalachicola Bay or up there around Jake. But anyway, that's, you and I could reminisce for hours about the wonderful time.
One more thing about those oysters was watching Jake shucking those. Jake and his son there would shuck those oysters for all of you guys. Y'all were too lazy or didn't know how, and then lick the juice running down his arm off, and I told everybody the best places the hottest spots to hunt at Brinkley's house was where there was the most oyster shells piled up on the side of the road. That's where the most hunting went on.
That was amazing. I had never eaten oysters on the half shell until I went down there. And those ice cold oysters with a good bottle of Texas Pete or whatever, and a cracker, as they say back in West Virginia, that'll make you smack your grandma.
And let me tell you, Jake would always save about 12 or 15 of those oysters and shuck them. And Shirley liked fried oysters. She didn't like the raw one. And they would give them to her, and they would fry those oysters up at Quita and Herwood the next day. They would they have them at night. One more story about them that I thought was amazing is I spent a lot of money down there, not on Johnny. Everything was free there. But Shirley and Quita and Diane going Black Friday, going shopping, cost me a bundle. They always went shopping. Well, Friday afternoon, we would wait till Friday night. Johnny had a catfish pond in behind his house.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't, that pond has a rubber lining in it. So no mud in those catfish and everything. But anyway, they came in, it was almost dark or so, and we grabbed a bite. We had fixed our own food. You know how that was. Me and HL and Johnny, we'd prepare on, the women are gone. They're shopping. So they came in, and I said, guys, and I always didn't want to be a sponger, and that's about all you can be down there. They won't let you spend any money. And I said, guys, if y'all will come up back in early tomorrow afternoon, Saturday, we're going hunting. I said, we'll go here to one of these fish camps. I love to go to those places and eat that seafood and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They were fresh and everything. And, okay, we'll be in. So we go hunting at night and come in about, I don't know, 2 o'clock in the morning. And there's this stainless steel enclosed trailer sitting up there in the corner of the yard. And, oh, okay, you know, all the equipment sitting around, you don't think nothing about it. And the next day we were up and we fishing. Johnny and I and HL went down and caught a few catfish. And these two guys came in and opened the thing up and started cooking. And they catered in some dudes there they had seafood of all kinds. And I had mentioned the fact, you know, that certain kind of fish I love, they had those. And what you doing, Johnny? He said, oh, we're going to have a fish fry here after a while. And he's out in the road there. Every time he sees a car coming up, flagging down, his neighbor saying, y'all come on back about 3 o'clock now. We're going to have some seafood here.
Oh,
where can
boy.
you go and be entertained like that? I mean, you know,
no.
We're not going down. We're not going down in the country to eat. We can let them bring it up here to us. So.
Johnny Brinkley is the consummate Southern gentleman too. I mean, Johnny goes back.
Totally.
He had some really good black and tan dogs down through the years. His son Doug liked the competition hunt, but some of the fondest memories I have is with Johnny and David, and I'm sure you were probably there some of the times and all, sitting around their kitchen table and talking about dogs and talking about the old days. And eating always more than you could believe. Just that's all part of the sport, Lee, that we want through this podcast to portray to these younger people. You can have this too. Get to make some real friends, fellowship with them, do things with them. It doesn't always have to be out in the woods. It can be, you know, get together for a weekend or a holiday, you know, and take your wives together and let them get to know each other, and the kids, you know, grow up together and all that. It's just a wonderful, wonderful way for people to be together. I know we can't right now be with anybody but those inside our four walls, but you know, this is a good segue, I think, Lee, into the fact that, you know, there's been several young people that you've been influential in their lives in the sport, and then there's also the fact that you've held seminars, bench show seminars, and those kind of things.
Had one this past summer down at Union for David and the youth and Steve. We had I think the head count was like 38 there. Lisa Bedingfield and John Border and I did one for David, and it really makes me feel good to go do it, to be able to share whatever I know, and you know, I also learned a lot from Lisa and John with their segment of it. Yes, you're exactly right.
Well, we've mentioned our friend David McKee, and you're the guy that introduced me to David. And of course, anybody in the Southeast knows David. He's you know, the president of the Grand American Association and puts on the Grand American Hunt every year in Orangeburg, which is it's still one of the biggest hunts in the country. And he's been the president of the South Carolina Coon Hunters Association for a lot of years. And so you and David were friends, but it goes back, and you know, and David, I'm sure wouldn't mind me mentioning, you know, he and his wife Deb went through a horrible thing that no parent should ever have to do, and that was losing their son in an auto accident. But you mentored Chris McKee into coon hunting and night hunting and things like that, didn't you?
Well, yeah, and also Chris was a great athlete, and I would go down. He played football and basketball and everything, and I would take off and go down there on a Friday night and watch him play. Then David and him and I would head out coon hunting, and Chris was. I mean, you have to put David and Deb up there with Johnny and Quita and everything as far as type people they are. Yeah, Chris, I helped him a lot, I think, in sports, with the different things. I would never played football, but I did play basketball. And I don't know, Doc Ganetti was a doctor there in Union, and we were over at his house. He had black and tan dogs, and David and Chris and I and some other kid. I don't remember those names, but they were 14, 15 years old, and he had a basketball goal out in, Doc did, and I'll never forget, I'd tell him, Chris, don't be slinging the ball up. Here's the way you shoot the basketball, things like that, and he really picked it up, and I never forget when David came out, he told David, he said, man, I learned how to shoot a basketball. And things like that, and then he hunted Boomer in the youth hunts, and he loved Boomer, and I would go out on the cats in the youth hunts with him. He hunted Boomer, won one of the hunts with Boomer, one of the youth hunts down there, and then there was another kid there that hunted Rowdy in those youth hunts, and I swear his name just some of Chris's friends. I'd let him take a dog and go hunt, but I went with Chris, and David would always go with the other kid, and Chris was just special. He was a special kid. Well, they retired his jersey at down at Myrtle Beach.
At the college.
Yeah, and as you said, Donnie Shell was the only other person to have his jersey retired down there. And he was just a terrific kid, and then so was David and Debbie. I said with Debbie, after the seminar, they had a dinner there at the club last summer, and I said with her, and they really loved that kid, and now you got to know that David's daughter has a young lady, Chrissy, and I don't know whether I've been, helped her so much along the way, but David asked me a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, said, Chris, you got into these dogs, and she doesn't have anything. I'll get her a dog. So I'd bred Willie to this female here I had, and I said, I'll get her a puppy. Well, she won champion male this past year at North Carolina State with it. And then the Gabby dog, I'd finished her in the Grand, and I called David, and I said, if anybody wants Gabby, she's 3 or 4 years old. And boy, I got a text right away from Chrissy. I want her. She's got Gabby down there. And I give them the dogs. I don't sell the dogs. You called me one time that wanted a puppy for some young boy down in Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they came up here. Great people. Took the puppy. Never showed it. That's okay. I know the kid has a nice hound dog, and
yeah.
Yeah. I can sell a dog, Steve, for a puppy for $200, or I can make a friend for $200 and not sell them. So take the dog. I'd rather have the dog than the $200. I'd rather have the friend than the $200. It's just the way I am,
Good. For sure. And then, of course, the Lannings is another story. Two generations that you've helped.
He's going to be listening to this, and don't give him a swell kid or nothing. Don't give him. Funny thing about Tommy, he was 14, 15 years old, and he went to high school here. And, of course, we had the flower shop, and his mom was traded there. Well, actually, it was for the flower shop that I met Tommy. And he started hunting with me. We'd go to the hunts, and Jake loved Tommy. I mean, my brother Jake, and Jake went with me all the time. Pick him up in Harrodsburg and go on to Illinois, wherever. Tommy B was us. Well, we would show the dogs. Well, you drive from South Carolina to Ohio, Indiana. Dogs are dirty and they're not ready, and we'd be in the motel. Jake and I bring dogs in the motel. Tommy'd be in the shower in his shorts and giving the dogs a bath, and him too. And now Tommy's he even takes Austin, my grandson, all the time hunting and things. He said, now I know why you put up with me and took me to all these hunting shows. I did all the dang work. And now I'm using these kids to do the same thing I learned from you.
But did you see how...
Talking about taking showers in motels, I've plugged up more than one drain doing that very same thing. I did it just a couple of years.
Stick them in, we would stick them in and all that kind of stuff, get them in there. But we took our own towels. We didn't use theirs. I was a good enough guy to take my own towels. But yeah, Tommy is just, he calls Austin, my grandson Austin, is 15, and takes him hunting and everywhere, and I really appreciate that.
But do you see how this is passing down? You mentored Tommy and took him to the hunts, and you let him do some of the dirty work and all, but that's what kids need to do to learn how to do things, But now he's passing it on to Austin.
Right.
And then his own daughter, Lauren, who you worked with.
Oh, Lauren, she's a sweetheart, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she loves showing the dog. She hunted with him. Lauren hunted with him a lot. Lauren's in college now, going to Clemson, and she's living up there. But they were just special people. I remember one time Jake came down, and we stayed in some state-run places down at Orangeburg, and a friend of mine had some contact with these cabin things down there, and we're up, getting the dogs ready to head in right quick to get to the show, and Tommy asked Jake, my brother, there was another old man, Jerry, was his name, with Jake, and Tommy said, Jake said, you want to stop and get something to eat, or you want to get a biscuit or whatever? And Jake said, Tommy said, me and Jerry are just like two old hogs. We don't have no place to go and nothing to do when we get there. So it was kind of, Tommy still uses that. I don't have nothing to do and no place to go and nothing to do when I get there. But those kids, and then we come along, Lenny and Rhonda, my daughter-in-law, my oldest son, show dogs and hunted a lot, and it's actually Rhonda's grandson, Chunk, the one we call Chunk. Quincy's his real name, and he calls me grandfather, right on like the rest of them, and to take him and Austin to the AKC Youth World, and they showed their dogs, and to take, go to the Sunshine Jamboree. I was down there this year and didn't show a darn dog. The kids showed my dogs, all of them, and they learned it from it. And then like I told you, I've been doing some work around the house here. And Austin's out of school. Me and him added on to my barn. 15-year-old kid don't know how to use a saw and a hammer and things like that. It's just something they got to learn. And it was good for him, and he enjoyed it, helping me build it.
Well, the point here is, for me, is that, the sport can be passed along, I guess, on social media posts and all this kind of thing, the way kids like to do things now. But it's really passed on the real heritage, the real treasure in this sport is passed down in human vessels. It's in passing down a grandfather to his grandchildren, somebody like you, a friend's son, with
sure.
Chris McKee, and
Chrissy, don't leave her out. I love
and Chrissy, his granddaughter, and I thank you for introducing me to David, because he and Deb are just dear friends. And so the point being here for our listeners out there, and Chris, you can jump in here and don't let me ramble too much, but
how exactly do I get in here? That's what I want to know.
You've never just jump in with both feet. But that's the thing, is how we got to pass this on. It's got to be passed on, and the best way to do it is just one-on-one. And it's just my hope that the kids will find a Lee Currens somewhere in their experience along the way.
And do it the right way. Do it the right way, too. Don't forget doing it the right way. That's I take pride in a lot of things in my dogs and everything. And I can honestly say that from day one to this day right now, I've never done anything to my dogs that was illegal, cheating, or anything. And like I told Tommy years and years ago, we would go, and as they say, I lost a whole lot. I lost a lot more than I ever won. And I would, Tommy, and he had a tendency to, and I do too, I still do, to complain about the judging or the venue, where it was at and all that. I said, Tommy, we're coming back from somewhere one night. I said, why we lost? No, why? And he, we weren't good enough. That's why we lost, Tommy. And don't give me the excuses that so-and-so, I just don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. And we've left out a friend here that I don't want to leave out, because Lisa Hunsinger is one of my dearest friends. 20 years we've had dogs together, and all of her dogs go back to some way to Rowdy and Candy. And I buy something she wanted to do. It just worked out that way, I guess. City was a grandpup of Rowdy and Candy, and then Willie's out of City and other dogs. And Lisa is up there with David and Johnny and them. She's not in the circle because she lives in Illinois. She's not here close by, things like that. But to just a person that does everything right and just a friend. I mean, we don't know. She's helped so many people with dogs in the last 20 years or so, especially show dogs. And we get on into the competition part. Willie has a brother that's a grand knight. So he's not far off the line that he could have been a coon dog too.
Yeah.
But these kids coming up just need. We were at the Youth World over in Tennessee. You were with AKC at the time, and Tommy was staying across the road at another motel from us, and he had the high rise, the big expensive one. We didn't have that kind of money, but it was like 5:00 in the morning. He's beating on my door. Shirley and I and JT, my grandson, and he said, "Can you take care of Lauren?" He said, "My wife is in the hospital having a baby in South Carolina." I said, "Yeah." So we took Lauren, and she went to sleep, with Shirley there, and the rest of the morning. So what are we going to do to 4 or 5 o'clock? I think I did a seminar or something at work.
You did. We
took those two kids down to Pigeon Forge.
Yeah.
And all they want to do is ride the go-karts. It's $5 a piece every time they ride a go-kart. Tommy still owes me $200 or $300 for entertainment for his kids. But to go on, someone posted a picture back then on the message board for UKC of Little Belle, the one that my dog that Lauren was showing. And how people take pictures of dogs when you jump up on the bench. She wasn't set up. She was twisted all up and things. And this one lady, particular, from another state, come on the message board, and that dog won the Youth World. Well, Steve, the next year, she wasn't there. So the next year, you had the world there at the same place, and Lauren had her getting ready for the show. This very same lady, this is how, had some kids with her, brought them up there to the show. Said, "My goodness, isn't that a beautiful dog?" And me in my mouth what I had to say. I said, "Yes, ma'am, that's the one you put down last year for winning the show here." And that's not, don't, these are kids. Don't be,
the internet's a perfect place. The internet's a perfect place for everybody to have license to weigh in with their opinion. And I really think we'd be a lot better off if for one thing, when it comes to the youth hunt, it's about the kids. It's not about who wins it or, you know,
Sure.
If one of my kids took a youth or took one of my hounds, or any kid took one of my hounds and won a youth hunt, I would hope that I would celebrate the success of the youth and not use it as an opportunity to promote my dog. That's not what it's about. So
well, yeah, I when Austin when Coop got big enough to show, Coop was an open dog, and Austin, I don't get to show him. Austin shows him and loves him, and I call him Cooperton's his name. He's a beautiful young dog. That's gorgeous, and he won best medal show at Southeastern. He couldn't have been about 12. Yeah, well, Coop's 3 years old, and he was 12 or 13. I was more excited than I won Autumn's Oak or the World to see my grandson with his own dog, he claims, stays here at my house, and to win. I called Shirley's grandmother. I said, Austin, she said, no, he didn't. Oh, yes, he did, you know. And that's success right there. That is success totally, you know.
Well, Lee, what are you doing with your time these days with your dogs, and what's your going forward? I know
talking to two old guys in Florida on the phone about hound dogs, I guess.
Well, Chris is in Indiana, so.
Oh, is he? Well, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Don't worry about it.
I still have a part-time job. I work at the Connect at Southern Toll Road here. I've been there for almost 20 years, I guess, since they opened the road up. But I only work part-time when they need help. And Shirley is totally retired. You know, she had the floors for 32 years here in town, and we sold it. She sold it last December, and she reads a lot. I've got 5 or 6 acres here I have to maintain, and everything is slower as you get older. I just built a new kennel. Finished it up last night, as a matter of fact, for my new puppy. And, you know, we eat out a lot. We just talk, you know, for grandkids, have a family over. I guess about like everybody else when they're retired. I'm not very, very good at being retired. I don't know what you're supposed to do.
Well, how old are you now, Lee?
I'll be 81 in August.
That's awesome. It's
81, and I don't ever remember but 2 days in my life I didn't have access to some kind of a hound dog. And that's when I sold Belle and the banjo dog. I've never been without one. And
what would you trade? What would you change about your life over the years with
nothing.
These? Nothing.
Nothing. I don't know if anything going to change. Steve, it's a wonderful, sad feeling. My wife had gotten some pain medicine here. She was having some issues and kidney infections, and they gave her some pain medicine, and she's had them for quite a while. So back 4 or 5 months ago, I came in, you know, I've had surgery on a nerve in my leg, and she said, "What's one of my pills? Well, give me one of them." She gave them their 7.0 something, whatever they are names of them. And I dreamed all night, and most everything I dreamed about was coon hunting. Times I hunted or playing ball with the kids all night long. So it went on about it, and I thought, oh, it's just coincidence. So sometime 2 or 3 months later, she gave me another one, and I did the same thing. So that's the thing your subconscious mind takes you back to. So you must have enjoyed it quite a bit, you know.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Chris, that's all I've got for our guests today. Man, it's been great catching up. Of course, Lee and I talk quite often, and you know, and that's the way it is with your close friends. But Lee, it's been a great visit. Chris, what do you got, buddy?
I'll tell you what, I've just sat here and listened to all of it. A lot of it I can relate to. You know, the excitement of going to those breed days back in the 80s. I just couldn't spend enough time there. I remember when Walker Days came to Bartholomew County or Columbus, Indiana, and our club hosted that event, or was a partial host, or how I was there. Can't even remember it, but you know how it was being managed, but I was just on cloud nine. I didn't even have a driver's license, so I was bumming rides, I was hitching rides, I was doing whatever I could to get to the fairgrounds that were on the other side of town for Walker Days when it was there. And it was just, every breed days has been like that for me over the years. Going to the big events, we would go to events all over the country. So yeah, it was so much fun. Black and tan days, the list goes on. But one of the things that I've enjoyed hearing from you, Lee, is, in my opinion, the people that I admire most and the people that have been the most successful and have the best stories to tell in this lifestyle are the ones who invested in other people. They were good family men. They provided for their families, but they were successful in everything they did. And when you're successful in the important things in life, then the success with your hounds is going to just naturally happen because it's in the right place and it's in the right priority. And the stuff you've done for mentoring kids, I mean, it just goes on and on and on. It's all examples of what we need. And we've talked about this before too, Lee. I'm glad to hear that at 81, you're still heavily involved. Too many times I know people who get to that age where they have trouble walking or they don't feel like they can contribute. They just hang it up and they kind of ride off into the sunset. But guys like you have so much to offer our hound hunting community, and I'm glad you were willing to come on and tell your story, and I'm glad you're involved, and it's been a pleasure. I just kind of sat back and listened. It was just one of those podcasts where I just need to sit back and listen. So.
Well, I looked at everything this way. I'm a competitor, and I am a freak at winning. I don't take second place or third place easy, but I don't show it. I don't think Steve's ever heard me complain about one show or one hunt or anything. I store it in my mind if I didn't like the things. But, there's some things that I came up, I've told Steve some of these things and over the years. John Wooden, he said one time and that winning is easy, but the will to prepare to win is hard.
Yes.
And that's the whole thing. If you're prepared to win, you'll win.
That's right.
And preparing to win with hounds starts with breeding from, like this puppy I got coming. We're all excited about. Lisa just talked to me text me that we're going to have a load, and then it's another thing that people, kids, especially if they listen, are young people and everything. And I told Steve this, my high school coach one time when I was, a freshman, he said, losers practice till they get it right. And I thought, how dumb. If you got it right, you're a winner. And then when we started the season, he told us, winners practice till they can't do it wrong.
Mm.
And that's the difference between winning and losing so many times. It's not easy. Winning is the hardest thing in life you can do. Winning in school, you start out in competition with your classmates who made the best grades and things like that. It's always about competition. Well, I never did either. But you wanted to. You didn't have that was the lack of will to prepare to win.
That's right. I was the poster child for that. Let me tell you.
Yeah, me too, for sure. I wanted the grades, but I didn't want to do the work.
That
right. Wasn't part of the
you didn't do the will. You didn't have the will to prepare to win. Then.
That's right.
Yep.
Guys, I really appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate it, and I know I've rattled, and I know you'll cut out what you don't want, the bad words and everything, and I'm not a person that cusses a lot or nothing. Well, I know
good.
You
did good. Steve,
you probably heard of Dabo Sweeney. I'd say you probably heard of Dabo Sweeney, the coach at Clemson here.
Yeah.
He's a real religious guy. Well, he hired one of his players when he first started as a receiver coach, and they were interviewing the receiver, the coach here for the new job, is his first job. And he said, well, Coach Sweeney's got a lot of strict things. He said, He says you cannot cuss, but you can use ass and damn because they're both in the Bible.
Yeah.
So I can use those two according to my famous mentor here, Dabo Sweeney. They're in the Bible. But It's been great, guys, and I hope I haven't rambled too much. And there's so much more you could go on with. I could go on for weeks and weeks. And
yeah. Well, you've got a lifetime invested, that's for sure.
We'll have to have you back sometime.
I haven't had one hunt in 65 years, you know, and also being able to hunt with all the people that I have over the years, some famous, some not so famous. We left out one of my best friends in the world, Harrod K., who since I moved here been my number one hunting partner that lives here close to me. And if he happens to listen, his daughter might pick this up. He still owes me 10 pieces of metal roofing. So, to go on my barn.
Well, Steve, you want to wrap this thing up?
Yeah, Chris, it's been, and thank you for indulging Lee and me to get together and just talk about old times and all. And Lee, we have a saying here, and it kind of goes along with what you've done down through your career with your own dogs, your Kentucky River dogs, and Chris has had his lines of dogs, and we all do. There was an expression that came out of West Virginia from a bear hunter there that says, boys, when we get this track started here in a few minutes, you follow your hound and I'll follow mine.